So because we have Gautam here with us, and it's the last day, Gautam is good at telling stories. I haven't spoken to him about this, but he has a lot of anecdotes and stories, and in particular examples from his own life. And putting examples to the concept is very powerful, because ultimately we need to start seeing what the concepts are pointing at in their in how our life expresses itself. So if the concept talks about the uncomfortableness of blame, that blame is a form of suffering that adds an additional heaviness to the inevitable pleasure or pain of life. It's a concept that talks about a generic blame. And we might understand it intellectually and think that I understand it. And when we start seeing what the concept is pointing at, to the actual feelings of blame in our own life, even very simple blame of someone turning up late, for example, which someone turning up late is not ideal. I appreciate that being on time is an important thing in life, but inevitably sometimes someone turns up late, and we might find that we realize the blame in the moment because of someone having turned up late, and how we are interpreting that action relative to who we feel we are. And so as we start seeing the actual feelings and understanding them to be what the concepts are pointing at, that's how the understanding goes deeper and deeper. Because some things we might not realize fit into a certain category, of expectation or blame or guilt or pride. And until we actually see, that in itself is a form of blame, then it goes unchecked. So the examples of, for example, one Gautam used about seeing an event in his work life, for example, and seeing how an old reaction would have been one way, and then awareness of the whole situation and recognizing that the blame isn't there, or in the interim seeing how the blame arises for a period and then the understanding cuts it off. These are very useful. So do you have some stories or examples you'd like to share?
I think I can use one from this morning. There was a sage in Bombay called Vimlananda, and he said something very true with reference to his disciples. He said, I like to give my disciples surprise tests. Like in school, the teacher would not announce, your exam program, and you prepare for it. So he did not believe in that. He believed in surprise tests, because he said, then you know how well prepared the student is, because life is about surprises. Then I know who is truly following my teaching and who is not. It is truly a measure to know how deep a teaching has sunk in when you are faced with the unexpected. Now, a very simple situation which I would love Roger to explain, because he does it so well. The situation was, two of us, me and somebody who's been very intimately following the teaching, who lives in Goa, went for a cup of tea in the morning to Bombay Coffee Roasters. Now, my tea came and his didn't. And we must have asked at least 3 times, and we were told it's coming, and then there was no time. I had to leave. That was the situation. Now, because one has been immersed in the teaching, he had the clear acceptance that it was not meant to come. There was a wish, it was not fulfilled. To the point where I said that let's just forget it. We had already paid the bill and let's go, but let me ask if they'll give it to you in a takeaway cup. Even that didn't happen. It was just too slow a system. Now, for me, it was a very simple seeing. If we use again very simple language, that a wish was not fulfilled because it was not meant to be. For him, it was the same. Did it convert to blame? Were the staff blamed? To a minor degree, maybe, oh, they are so inefficient, as a passing thought. But the underlying acceptance was, it was not meant to be. So even if there is irritation that there was a wish for a cup of tea, that irritation is not extended in the duration of time where it becomes a fight against people for not giving you what you wanted and a fight against God for not fulfilling your simple wish. Now, the feeling may still be there that it was an earnest wish for a hot cup of tea and it didn't get fulfilled. That is the human experience. What I would like Roger to elaborate on is the difference between truly not holding on to any feeling deep inside as a resentment, as hurt because you didn't get your cup of tea, or the ability to see that it was a movement, there was, let's say, pain in the moment that the wish was not fulfilled, and then it was let go. Because there is a very subtle difference. So Roger, could you please take them through that process?
Yes. So let me just get, because I'll talk for 10 minutes, I'd like to get it right. The difference between seeing it was God's will for me not to get the tea, and not getting the tea and feeling. So actually, I'll let you rephrase
the difference between being absolutely okay with the fact that the wish was not fulfilled and thinking that it's absolutely okay but still holding on to something within.
Very
the
good.
Discomfort.
Yes. So, what in as I'm this is in line with some discussions we have had very recently. So, what it requires us to do is create some conceptual distinctions in order to understand this, and essentially it creates the conceptual distinction of the two forms of suffering as I see them. And those two forms of suffering actually stem from the two forms of the psychological identity, or the two aspects of the psychological identity that has been put in place. One form of the psychological identity is the interpretation of oneself and of the other as being a separate, independent entity, the doer, that is completely responsible for how things turn out. So an interpretation of oneself as being an autonomous entity that is the way you are because you have made yourself the way you are. and that the other is the way they are because they have made themselves the way they are. It's really ridiculous, actually, when I think about it. And yet this is the deeply ingrained self-identity and what we then project onto the other. The notion that I am the way I am because I made myself this way, that I have control over being the way I am, and therefore what I think, what I feel, what emotions come up, what suffering comes up, what actions and behaviors happen in the flow of life are my doing. They are the output of me, and I am in control of me. That is the root core of the psychological identity that has been set in place by life. And isn't it funny? Life has set in place the idea of the me. So the me that believes it is in control of itself didn't even create itself. So life put in place this cruel joke. And that forces us, for as long as that deeply ingrained sense of who we are, or belief about what life is, and specifically in reference to who we are, forces an uncomfortableness with the other and an uncomfortableness with oneself to continually arise as an attitude to all of the circumstance that is specifically able to be linked back to the actions of the other or the actions of myself. So if the other is late, then we say, you shouldn't have been late. It was in your control to be on time and to be a specific type of person. So in the situation of the coffee or the tea doesn't turn up. The order was placed with a particular person. The tea doesn't turn up, which really means that the circumstance and the person as they are has resulted in the tea not turning up. And yet this psychological identity superimposes an idea of what the other is that is out of line with what this teaching suggests. The idea we have based on this doership notion is that that person should be different, should control themselves to be different in such a way that they deliver a different outcome to the outcome that has been delivered. So that means we have to feel the uncomfortableness of blame. Now, the second part of the psychological identity that has been put in place is what I would refer to as a subset, you could say, of the notion of personal doership, or you can separate it out and look at, so we can either look at an umbrella that we call the belief in personal doership, and under that umbrella there is specifically the belief of personal doership. I am in control of everything that happens through me, and I'm in control of who I am in each moment. And then underneath the big heading of personal doership, there is attachment to outcome. So two branches under personal doership: the actual belief in personal doership and attachment to outcome. Or, if you like, we can separate them out into just personal doership, the ingrained belief and identity of personal doership, and the ingrained identity of attachment to outcome. And what the attachment to outcome part of this psychological identity says is my completeness, my wholeness, is added to by pleasure and is subtracted from by the deliverance of pain. Added to by favorable circumstance and subtracted from by unfavorable circumstance. That conclusion about who we are has sort of snowballed based on the initial sense of dissatisfaction, sense of uncomfortableness there is in life when this identity sets in place. So the identity sets in place, and by default there is an uncomfortableness with oneself, and we feel that uncomfortableness, and then we look at our life experience and we see the best I can do in life is to get pleasure. And so there becomes this belief that says the best available in life is pleasure, and on the occasions when pleasure is delivered, the uncomfortableness is less obvious because it gets covered up by the pleasure in the moment. And so the identity forms in such a way that says my completeness, who I am, is added to by pleasure and taken away by pain. Because when the pain is delivered, there is the pain plus this load of uncomfortableness from the very notion that pain is an attack on who I am, plus the load of blame towards the other. So all of this is very complex and gets put in place as life progresses day after day after day. The identity gets more and more ingrained. Now, the reason that it's important to hold these two aspects of the self as being there is because if we see that life is happening, that although I might like to be perfect, the fact is that I don't function in a perfect way. And even though it might be nice if the other is perfect, they don't function in a perfect way. And so let's say that part of it falls away. The seeing that everyone is the way they are, that sets in place. And so we see that I am not the doer and the other isn't the doer. Everything is happening according to God's will. If that is deeply understood, and yet the other aspect of the psychological identity isn't undone, then the very nature of life, which is sometimes pleasure and sometimes pain, although it's not my doing and the other's doing, is still going to impact or be received by the psychological identity, the false sense of self, the false idea of who I am, that feels that they require pleasure and the aversion of pain in order to be complete. And so if that's the case, someone will experience life where when pain is delivered, there is an uncomfortableness with the pain, not the uncomfortableness of blaming the other for the pain, but simply an uncomfortableness with the pain being there. And the uncomfortableness is not the pain of the pain. I'm not talking about uncomfortableness because of the pain of the pain, but a psychological relationship to the pain that is saying, because of this pain, I am not complete. Because pleasure wasn't delivered to me, I am not complete. And that is independent in a way of who or why the pleasure or pain is there or not there. So I appreciate it if someone says, look, it's fine for there to be the understanding that no one is the doer, but that doesn't change the fact that life is still experienced in a way where there is an uncomfortableness with the very nature of life, sometimes pleasure and sometimes pain. That nature of life being sometimes pleasure or sometimes pain seems to be an affront on my idea of myself, or at least I experience living in life with an uncomfortableness, and yet I can see that no one is responsible for the outcomes. Now, the really good news is that, so I would agree, if what we are is added to and made whole by pleasure, 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 and the nature of life is sometimes pleasure and sometimes pain, then we have a problem. It means we can't really ever be fully comfortable in life. The good news is that the core of the human being, our true nature, is not added to and subtracted from by pleasure and pain. And so when both aspects of the psychological identity start being dissolved by how life unfolds, meaning life making us, inserting a motivation and interest in self-inquiry, in happiness in daily living, and then being exposed to information that we might not have gravitated to before, thinking about the experience, awareness on one's own internal and external life experience starts happening. And when that happens, and both aspects of the self, psychological self, start dissolving, there is the capacity to be at peace, even when circumstance is painful. Because the psychological identity dissolves, the true nature of who we are starts to shine through, and it becomes our own experience that what I am at my core, when I am connected to that part of myself, is complete, meaning there is peace. The resistance to the pain that was happening from the level of the psychological identity is not there when there is a resting in our own being. And that self-confirming feedback has to be something we abide in more and more often, to become more and more familiar with the self that isn't dependent on outcomes, that isn't made more or less complete based on outcomes. And I would say that is the aspect of the person that someone who is dying and is at peace must be connected to. So I'll repeat that in a different way. Someone who is dying, in the process of dying, finds themselves nonetheless at peace. In my estimation, that must happen because they are connected to and familiar with the aspect of the human being that is there for everyone, is the core of what the human being is, and they are connected to that. And so a connection to that self and a dissolving of the opposite notion that what I am is dependent on outcomes being a certain way means that when the coffee or the tea doesn't arise, a biological irritation can arise, a biological response or reaction. I'm not distinguishing between response and reaction. As long as it's on the biological level only, a response that could actually go up and say, hey, listen, I don't know how many times I have to ask you, now I need you to act. As I see it, even something like that can be a biological response, with the deep understanding that even having said that, I might not get my tea. But in the circumstance, and intelligence is, if I feel like the tea in the moment, and I've asked 3 times nicely, the 4th time I'll say, listen, can you put everything else down? Because now enough's enough, and make me my tea. Now, Gautam's temperament, biological temperament, won't do that. Someone else's biological temperament, even with the understanding of non-doership, where guilt and blame doesn't arise, I feel can do that with the deep understanding that even having done that, I might not get my tea. So if it's a biological reaction that says, in the circumstance, how can I get what I want? With the understanding, I'm not in control of getting what I want, and it subsides, and in fact that biological reaction doesn't come from the psychological self that feels like it needs pleasure, pleasure, pleasure in order to be complete, then that is pure anger. And it's not infused with an uncomfortableness of who I am. If, however, the identity that is attached to outcomes still exists, and the understanding of non-doership is very deep, what may happen is that there's no blame towards the other for being the one that is responsible for the tea not being delivered. There is the pain of not having your tea delivered, and infused in that pain, there is an uncomfortableness that one lives with. But the uncomfortableness is in itself a form of suffering, because the second part of the psychological identity hasn't yet dissolved. And as we find more and more often that sometimes I get what I want and sometimes I don't get what I want, and yet I survive, I'm fine. As we start to realize that, there is an automatic dissolving of this attachment to outcome, because there is the conscious recognition, actually outcomes are not really that important to me being. So in the suggestion to abide in I am, one of the things that is most prevalent in the I amness, and it's sometimes the word I am is sometimes flipped or exchanged for a different word, existence. So some teachings won't use I am, but they'll talk about existence. In the I am, there is, I exist. I am. That is one of the undeniables in life. One of the only undeniables. It's not a concept. No one can deny that they are. They might not be aware of it, When we really look at it, it is an I am. I exist. And so, a returning back to that allows us to not intellectually or conceptually realize that my happiness isn't, or my completeness, my existence is not dependent on the flow of life. This movement, this practice, something that becomes automatic, a dropping back into your own existence, even in the face of no tea. Your existence even in the face of being betrayed by a friend. Your existence, your undeniable existence, in the face of having lost a loved one. And the more intimately connected that we become with this unchangeable sense of existence, the more that the flow of life and the pleasures and pains of the flow of life, including the thoughts and the emotions, are seen as another layer of the human being, experienced on a different layer to the I amness. And when I say, I'm using conceptual distinctions here to create the possibility of more clarity maybe when we start looking at our work. But in the end, there are layers, 2 layers, and they're not 2. That means we get to live life fully as the human being, experiencing the pleasure and pain, and not losing contact with that part that is our very core, that knows itself to be untouched by the flow of life. And that delivers the difference between not receiving the tea and feeling deeply at peace on the level of self with not having received the tea, because there is inside nothing saying my existence is dependent on getting the tea. And on the biological level, the response can be, listen, I would like my tea. Now someone would say, that response clearly doesn't demonstrate internal at-peaceness. And I'd say, well, I can appreciate that from the outside, based on maybe a projection of your sense of self, that's the case. But my experience internally is that even with the biological reaction that may actually ask for decisiveness and be sharp, I see that on the biological level, and the internal sense of self, although not separate from the biological movement, because the whole of the human experience is one, remains completely undisturbed. And that, I guess, is the difference between feeling that you understand that life is sometimes pleasure and sometimes pain, and receiving the pain and feeling the pain plus an inevitable uncomfortableness with oneself. Not the uncomfortableness of blaming the other, not the uncomfortableness of blaming yourself, but the uncomfortableness of the residual self-identity that believes itself to be dependent on outcomes. And when the outcome is delivered, that will explode in a minor or major way into an uncomfortableness with the very fact that pain has been delivered or the fact that pleasure might end. And that uncomfortableness too needs to be seen as a form of suffering, which essentially is based on the belief that my happiness, my completeness is to be found in outcomes. And so, at the beginning of the talks, we ask, what are you really looking for in life? The answer is happiness. Everyone is seeking happiness. The deeply ingrained sense of self is seeking happiness in outcomes. That is what is assumed to be the best available in life. Pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. The teaching says that in itself is part of the error. Happiness is available for the human being, but not in the form of pleasure, 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 not in the form of circumstance being a particular way, but in the form of peace of mind. And peace of mind is available only when the nature of life and the nature of self is seen for what it is. The first part, seeing the nature of life as an unfolding, sometimes pleasure, sometimes pain, and using the other as an instrument through which the pleasure or pain is delivered, and using your own actions, or using yourself, not you using yourself, but life using yourself, your body, in the way that in the same way as it uses the other to deliver sometimes pleasure and pain, it also delivers pleasure or pain through one's own actions. So to see that clearly, that the nature of life is sometimes pleasure and sometimes pain, and that there is no doer, one half of the equation as I see it, and the other half is to understand, and my nature, my core, doesn't depend on pleasure in order to be. I exist prior to any circumstance turning out a particular way, and I continue to exist during a circumstance turning out a particular way. And a groundedness in that sense of self demonstrates firsthand that my happiness, my completeness, my peace is not dependent on outcomes.
My question is, isn't it easier to access that sense of self and have a grounded sense of self when things are pleasurable, because it's obvious that there's less resistance, there's less attacks from whoever, and it just feels easier. So isn't it wiser to tread in that direction and then, start there at least until...
I agree if the system is set up to automatically get involved in painful circumstance, which is understandable if the system includes this psychological identity that feels added to by positive circumstance and attacked by negative circumstance, deep down ultimately attached to love of the other. That's what is the deep down belief. I will one day be complete when I have love of the other, and I am not complete when the other is not loving me. So if that's the system and it's being triggered, the triggering is misunderstanding, which means a disconnection from the self. And so I'd say if someone uses spirituality seeking only as a antidote in the moment to deep suffering, there's no hope for that seeker if that is the way that their interaction with seeking is, because in those moments there's absolutely no clarity, no space to see what is pointed at. All there is the involvement and the uncomfortableness and the suffering. And so the seeking, the learning, the change doesn't really happen when there's no space. If, however, the seeking, the investigation, the inquiry is happening when the suffering is not intense, there's much more space. And so I completely agree with what you're saying, which is why monks traditionally went into monasteries, because there is, for that period of time, less input from the external world and more time for there to be contemplation and introspection. The suffering, however, it always, if one's seeking is more holistic and balanced, then the suffering can serve as a most useful part of the inquiry, because it is there as an opportunity saying, look at me, look at what underlies that uncomfortable dynamic that is arising. So the suffering inspires the seeking in the first place, because intuitively deep down there is a knowing that what I am is not suffering. So that inspires the seeking. It's an intuitive intelligence. And then through the seeking, the suffering serves as an opportunity to investigate firsthand what the suffering is, which hopefully will then lead one to a ticking off of all the concepts that are put forward. Because the concepts are simply describing life from a perspective where this introspection has taken place in a way that was fruitful. And so the concepts are really just describing an introspection that has happened for someone else. And that introspection means that the introspections that happen in the future hopefully are less labored, and less time is spent going around some of the cul-de-sacs, because someone is putting forward all the hints and tips that they saw through their process. And so each sage was helped by their teacher and the teachings that came before, and then some of their own experiences and insights that might not have been in their teaching, that teaching that helped them get interwoven into the teaching that they put forward. And that's just there to help focus the attention of the new seeker. It says, look at this is what's important to look at. And it can make the contemplation one-pointed.
But I think living the lives which we do in cities or towns, the growth comes through the pain and suffering, because it gives us opportunities to look at things. It reminds me of an article I had written on the road. Someone had come to me with issues of road rage. So I explored that from the teaching point of view. And let's look at it very simply. Let's say you're driving from work to home every day and nothing happens. It is rare in a city like Delhi or Mumbai that nothing happens. At some point or another, someone is going to come in your way, dent your car, cut through your lane, right? That's going to happen. That is the nature of life. The pleasure would be that every day nothing is going to go wrong in my world. But in a city like Mumbai, you buy a new car and within the first 10 days you're going to get a scratch, which is reality. So we explored this further. What happens when someone, no fault of yours, you've stuck to your lane, and someone comes and hits your car? The anger, the rage, why does it arise? If he struck someone else's car, it would not arise. You would say, oh God, he struck that one's car. My car. How dare you hit my car when I have not done anything wrong? Now that rage, if it is extended in the duration of time, can lead to a lot of trouble on the road. So these opportunities of pain come, and if it is God's grace, we reflect, why did I get triggered so much? What upset me so much? Why my car? Why am I upset that it is my car and not the other person's car? Which means, very simply, that I derive a sense of self from my car. That car which I am sitting in has become an extension of myself. So first I have this body which is my body. Then I have a car which is a shell around my body, which is now my car. And somebody had the gall, the audacity to come and dent my car. That is the way the ego works, because it has derived its sense of self from the car which it purchased and it is driving in. Now, if there was an acceptance that events happen, deeds are done, there is no doer of any deed, as the Buddha said. If the person dented my car, of course anger will arise. I have not done anything wrong. I have stuck to my lane. But you know, your life's experience has shown you, you don't know why he swerved into your lane. You don't know if someone swerved into his lane. You don't even care. He swerved. The immediate reaction is anger, irritation. But if the sense of self is not derived from an object which I identify with, and when that object is under severe threat, I feel under threat, because the me has attached itself to something else which is not me. I've got attached to something which I value so much that I feel if that is under threat, I will die. That is what has happened. That is what spiritual inquiry is about. Why am I so upset? What happened? And then you realize, because I consider this as me. This is my car. That is the beauty of being given so-called painful situations in daily living. Otherwise, there is no growth. Right? So, we tend to now notice whenever there is pain, what is it that is giving us pain? What am I attached to? Why am I attached to it? That is the journey of understanding. Where all am I deriving my sense of self from? What objects am I deriving it from? What relationships am I deriving it from? Where if it is under attack, I feel I am under attack. My life is threatened. Deep down you know nothing's going to happen to your life because your car got nicked. But can you see the absurdity of investing your sense of self in objects, in material things? But that is what the ego does. And then when there is no acceptance of the fact that nobody is the doer, the suffering is really extended. Whereas if you have the acceptance, you let go of that. Once it has kicked in, that okay, this was meant to be by divine design. Sure enough, if I feel I need to go to the police station with the guy, both of us have stopped, I will go. But I will not carry with me this resentment of why did he do this to me? He should not have. That dialogue is what starts getting wiped out. Maybe you may feel that, he needs to learn a lesson, I should go to the cop station. Do what you think and feel you should do. But when this whole baggage of wrong identification, doership, and not accepting that it was God's will that this happened, when that load is not carried, things are seen so objectively, so wonderfully, that you deal with whatever is arising. So I'm using this example to come to this point that life is not a bed of roses. Life is not like, okay, so it's better that I just stay with pleasures. It's not going to be that way. But it's not in your control. In my own building, my car is parked in a space where the youngster whose car is behind me, every 2 weeks he has dented my car from the corner bumper, because it's difficult to park. So, and once a year I get my car painted to remove all the small nicks and cuts and bruises. I had just painted my car, and in 2 days this happened. So when I went down my building and I saw this, and his driver was floating around, I got irritation arose, because my driver said, "Saab, ye isne fir se kiya hai, he's again done this." So I told his driver, I said, to save me the bother and the grief, the day he does not nick my car, you come up and tell me. That was my irritation arising. But beyond that, there's a total acceptance that this is how it is. His car is not easy to park. It's a big car. My car is in front of his. I don't know how good or bad he is at driving. But at the end of the day, it's the bumper of my car. It's not me. Right? Can I survive with my bumper being nicked? Of course I can. Does it really matter? Now I'll tell you something beautiful what happened. The maid in my house was new, and she was clearing the bird feed by the window, and it fell out of her hands. We are on the 2nd floor, and it fell on his car and smashed his windscreen. This is 2 years ago. So I quickly called him up and I apologized, and I said, "Send me the bill. I'll clear it immediately, but it was a genuine mistake." And he said, "I'm so touched, because we would not have known from which floor what fell. And don't be silly, there's no question of me taking money from you, because the insurance will pay for it."
And besides which, I smash your car up every week.
That he didn't say. But my point is, you see, we tend to judge people for certain actions, whereas there are aspects of them which we may be oblivious about. We only view it from the point of view of what we think they did to me. How restricted is our view of people? That it is this me center which we are so concerned with, that we only see this equation between me and the other, not realizing that they have their own universe around them, and they may be different persona, benevolent, kind, compassionate, and this one dynamic, the way we see them, makes us define who they are in the entire universe. That is again what we do. That is how limited our view is, how restricted our view is, how perverse our view is. So, I do feel that daily living and whatever is not pleasurable for us is our best teacher, because life is about learning. Like you said it yesterday over lunch, we are learning all the time. What are we learning? We are learning about ourselves, that's it. It's so beautiful at one level. we were at, I was in a taxi near the gateway of India once. And taxi drivers in Mumbai are notorious. So we were going and another taxi almost hit us, So my taxi driver got wild. And in Hindi he said, "Kya aap kabutar dekh rahe the?" There were a lot of pigeons there, So he told the other taxi driver, "What are you doing? Are you looking at the pigeons or are you driving?" In anger. And that man, whose fault it was, because we had come to the signal, in Hindi said, "मैं तो कबूतर देख रहा था, लेकिन आप क्या कर रहे थे?" So he said, "I may have been looking at the pigeons, but what were you doing? You are there, no? You're driving, you take care." And it ended there. There was no thing after that because he burst out laughing. My driver burst out laughing. And what could have been a typical situation on the road with two taxi drivers screaming, shouting, yelling, fighting, just diffused. So which person makes us feel threatened in life? Which of our relationships are beautiful pointers for us?
This leads into part of what's in the framework, which is this understanding leads to the end of competition, rivalry, and anonymity. The other is no longer seen to be the one that in any moment can take away what you need in order to be. The other one is now seen as an instrument through which life delivers your destiny, which is going to be sometimes pleasure and sometimes pain. And Ramesh would say that the amount of pleasure or pain that you are destined to receive in your life has already been decided. And now, in each moment, you understand what the different pleasures and pains that are destined are, and the other is the instrument through which that's being delivered. So we now see ourselves as brothers and sisters in life. We're all in this together, rather than seeing them as the one that attacked me. And so you can see that this includes both the understanding of non-doership and the understanding that my happiness, my completeness, my peace of mind, my existence is not dependent on the various things that the others can add or take away from life. And so life can become much lighter. The air of suspicion and fear can weaken. And so once it, the examples, the stories are great. We're talking about cars here, material objects, and I'd just like to add in that you can start seeing that the action of the other that may deliver pain in an emotional way, through someone being dishonest to you or betraying you, is also a pain that you are not dependent on, or an outcome that doesn't define who you are. So it requires our intellect to, first we might say start cutting off the sense of uncomfortableness when a material object like a car gets dented. We might start seeing that get cut off with the understanding, actually this is my car, not who I am. And then it might extend into a more intangible object. And we realize, even the disrespect that someone might give us, the lying, the dishonesty, it too is an outcome, and it isn't what I need or don't need in order to be. And then the death of a loved one might happen. Sadness is bound to be there. That's the biological reaction. But there's a difference between the pain of sadness, which actually, when you look at it, is based on love, and the uncomfortableness of grief and feeling like you have lost something that is actually part of who you are. So even that can be known to be something that doesn't disturb your existence, as in doesn't define whether you exist or not. Now, the loss of a loved one is one of the most painful emotional pains you're going to have to face in life. And the pain, when it isn't infused with this sense of self, is manageable. And we may even find the beauty of it if it is based on love, a pain from love. And then lastly is coming back and seeing the body. If I lose a finger, or if my eyesight deteriorates, is my sense of being, do I still exist? As we get older, our physical abilities get less. Aches and pains come into the body. Our capacity to function in life gets heavily diminished. If there's no connection to the sense of self, and all we are identified with is essentially a covering for the sense of self, not too much unlike the body of the car. If there is, it is a little different, because the body is an intrinsic part of the person. However, the connection to self, in a way, does start to relate to the body as a vehicle, and not exclusively what I am. And so when you see handicapped people that have a vibrancy through them, an attitude of being grateful, and they're confined to a wheelchair, for example, they are an amazing first-hand demonstration that one's sense of self doesn't have to be defined by your physical capacities. And that's a gift that can come into our life when we start realizing that what I am exists on a much deeper level than just the material, physical, emotional, and thought levels. Are we on the same page with
Yes,
that?
absolutely.
Can we speak a little bit about that psychological entity and its dying, when the framework is penetrating deeper and deeper, and all these suppressed emotions start to come up, and what used to define you is kind of falling apart? And would you like to say something about that?
Mm-hmm. Yesterday, someone made a comment on one of the daily posts, saying, "What does die before you die mean?" And it's very much in line with what you're saying. Is that in this teaching there is, to me, a great distinction that may not be appropriate at some parts of the process, and at some point becomes very appropriate. And the teaching defines the ego not as something that dies, not as something that is the problem for peace of mind. It defines the ego as essentially the person, the combination of the impersonal consciousness of Source linked to this particular body-mind functioning as personal consciousness. So the ego is the combination of impersonal consciousness, the body-mind organism, and what is then experienced as personal consciousness. And that is a different use of the word ego to other teachings, and this is very important for us to see. The words need to be understood in a context and with a specific, one word can have several definitions attached to it when used by different people. And so this way of looking at it says, what I am is the ego. What any person is the ego. And any sage in life, Ramana Maharshi, for example, if you consider him to be the epitome of a sage, he too was an ego after liberation. And so what is the difference before or after liberation? And Ramesh would phrase it quite simply. He'd say, before liberation, there is an ego with the deeply ingrained belief of personal doership and attachment to outcome. Maybe I'm paraphrasing a little in context of how I put the concepts forward. After liberation, there is still an ego. However, the deeply ingrained belief of personal doership and attachment to outcome has been completely annihilated. And therefore, before liberation, the person includes this aspect that is continually being triggered by the flow of life. And after, that aspect has dissolved. Now, because we essentially are living life through the lens of doership and attachment to outcome, what we know ourselves as prior to this change is the doership and attachment to outcome identity. And so the process can feel like I am dying. What's really dying is this identity, this belief-based interpretation of who I am and what life is. But we are so intimately familiar with living life through that lens that as it starts to crumble, as the bonds that hold it all together start to get weaker through a seeing of things and a changing of what interests you and friends that you used to have that were essentially friends attracted because of a similar, because they deliver something to that identity. As that identity starts to get weaker, friends start to move, and we might actually start feeling like, who am I? What I know myself is crumbling. I can't hold it together in the way. And if there isn't yet a deep connection to a deeper part of oneself, it can create feelings of existential fear. Like, who will I be if all of this falls away, if all this attachment falls away? And the fear is I will be nothing, because a connection to a deeper sense of self may not have established itself yet. So there are a lot of different experiences that people will experience through this process of dissolving. In its extreme form, this is referred to as the dark night of the soul, where this existential fear arises, and along with it maybe some of the deep ingrained hatred and resentment that was put in place in the past, which is intimately making up that identity. And it can be very scary. The good news is there's actually nothing to be afraid of, because what is left is the self. What remains is the undeniable sense I am. And so there is the fear of what will I be when all of this dissolves, when there isn't the connection in particular moments to I amness. And then what is there is a psychological imagination of who I am and what I will be when what I know myself as dissolves. And so the psychological imagination is, I will be nothing. I will be lost in life. As soon as there's a connection to, I am, then the fear actually dissolves. So if that fear is coming up for someone, for you maybe, my suggestion is, this isn't something that one can do or will necessarily be there, but the more that there is a connection to this beingness that is actually all-pervading, it's always there. And in the fear, if there can be a connection to the actual I amness, the actual essence of who you are, that will instantaneously dissolve the fear. Because the answer to the question, who will I be if all of this falls away, is answered in the I amness. But then again, this is a process, and so, like Gautam said, the pain and the suffering serve their purpose. And so that fear coming up could actually be seen as a cleansing, as a releasing of the deeply ingrained belief of doership and attachment to outcome. So a dissolving of the fear may actually not be the objective that is best. And it's not something we can control anyway. And so to have another explanation that this is a fear that is a thought-based fear, and it can't kill me. It won't kill me. It will feel like I am dying. And in that feeling there is a grasping for some stability, something known. To understand that it won't kill, this is a feeling. It is a feeling that I am dying. And that can allow a relaxation. If that pops into our head, this is a feeling, allow it. What I am is prior to and will be after the feeling has come and gone.
Thank you.
About this subject, for sometimes not much, I have thought about you're right that if you feel like you're dying because you lose this sense that you're the doer and so on, you still have this sense of being, right? But talking about death, I think that what I think is that the experience most close to death that I can have is in the deep sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And from this point of view, in deep sleep, you don't have this sense of existence.
Mm-hmm.
So then you're really nothing.
Nothing.
Right?
Yeah.
So this is not that I have fear, but it's not very attractive, this idea at least.
Well, if it's beyond an idea, so if we take it beyond the idea of this and to the actual, let's be real with the actual experience, right? There are sometimes references to what I am, was never born, will never die, right? That can be soothing. Actually, we touch into this I am, and it can alleviate to some degree a fear of death if it's accompanied by the belief that what I am was never born and will never die. But when we get really realistic, like what you've said is pointing to the fact that, okay, I am in life. But in deep sleep, even I am falls away. Right? And let's assume that death is the complete collapse of experience, right? Where there's no I am in death. Definitely no Roger. So the end of Roger. So let's be specific. Do I know that this I am was never born and will never die? And at a certain point I had to get honest, and I said, because I thought maybe my peace of mind is based on belief that I am was there before birth and will be after death. And I said, the I am I know isn't even there in deep sleep. So where's the question of this I am, this I exist, being there in death? I said, I don't actually want to run with that. That's a belief. And so I said, I'm not holding the belief that I will be after death, and I was, right, even the impersonal I amness that I am aware that we can rest in daily life. I said, no, that is still part of the manifestation that is not there in deep sleep. So let me drop this idea that what I am was never born and will never die. And what I found is that the peace of mind didn't go away when that belief was dropped. So I said, this is peculiar. Clearly my peace of mind, well, not peculiar, I was happy for that fact. So then I said, clearly my peace of mind is not dependent on having been in the past and being in the future, but rather my peace of mind is because I am now, in the present. That to me is the beauty of a connection to self, is I am, and the I amness is content and at peace with being, not with being in tomorrow. It actually is content with being now. So because what we're seeking in practical terms is happiness in daily living, in the waking state, then I concluded for myself, well, knowing that I am is enough for my happiness in the waking state. When I'm really honest, I have absolutely no problems in deep sleep. I'm not even there. Death, let's say, is the same or an even more absolute. If
Yeah, because you don't come back.
yeah. And so then I said, if someone has the notion that's not very appealing, nothing, it has to be linked to a psychological remnant of who I believe myself to be. Still, it would be the thinking mind relating to nothing as an assault on who it is. So the deeper insight is that this I am stems from absolute nothing. So actually a dissolving of I am into absolute nothing is the complete return home. Well, if it's not intellectual, it's like, yeah.
I know it's like a psychological thinking, it's not...
No, but it makes sense that the question comes up. It makes sense that there is an uncomfortableness if it is processed by the psychological identity, let's say. And the answer is just simply more and more abiding in I am. And Nisargadatta, in his instruction to abide in I am, is at some point, that's the gateway to the absolute. Now, what that can imply is that we need to know the absolute. And then that can, for people that I've come across in that teaching or similar teachings, it can then become a new problem where that becomes the expectation for what liberation is in this life, is to be the absolute and the absolute is often referred to as absolutely nothing, which then someone is waiting for the experience of absolute nothing, which is an oxymoron. I mean, you can't, there is not going to be an experience of absolutely nothing. I do feel like intuitively there needs to be a sense from a resting in I am, that actually a dissolving of experience, which we have a sense of in deep sleep, or we know that there is the waking state, and then there is a sense that the waking state collapses in deep sleep, and we can get a sense that the I am is actually a manifestation, the primary manifestation of the absolute nothing. So then we can have an intuitive sense of what our source is. Our source is absolute nothing. And in the manifestation, the absolute nothing arises as the sense of being, the sense of I am, which is something available for everyone to rest in any moment, which is our connection to source. So in practical terms, I would say that the sense of I am is the junction point between the impersonal consciousness of source and the personal consciousness that everyone experiences for each moment. And to rest in I am is the meeting point where the impersonal turns into the personal. So
Not the base, because the base is the absolute, which is nothing.
yeah, which we can't know.
Yeah.
So to rest in the impersonal I am of being is our connection, our direct connection, and then to live from there, knowing that whatever I do is this consciousness moving and flowing through the body. That means there is a continuous, unbroken connection to source. So this teaching says our peace of mind comes from our continuous, unbroken connection to source, which can be seen in 2 points of view. We can have experiential connection, unbroken connection to source in this I amness that we then see is the essence of the human experience. That's why we say I am Roger, only because there is this felt sense of I am permeating the human experience. So there is the experiential connection to source, and also one where we know if I am not the doer, if I am an expression of source, then whenever I am speaking, whenever I am conscious, I must be by default connected to source. And that is our peace, because it is the dissolving of the belief in personal doership, which is one aspect of the false sense of self, and it is the dissolving of the attachment to material and outcomes in life.
I want to go a little bit back from the beginning. You said let go, some sentence like let go, when one is attached to something. And I have, in my experience of life, it is very difficult for me to let go. For example, the last days in Pune, I had picked up jewelry, and this man has made a false account, and I recognized it not immediately, and then I had to go back and missed the meditation, and then I met a person, and I said to her, I'm very excited like this, and she said, oh, you have been with Roger. Why are you excited? And I felt, she is so stupid. This woman is so stupid. And the problem is that I'm happy that I don't meet her now, because it's still something, it is fading. This feeling, I don't like her anymore. And that is what was there whole my life. I'm running away from this person, and suddenly, maybe after 15 days or 3 weeks, it is okay. But I can't do this let go. And also my master always says, drop it, let go, drop it, let go. And this sentence makes me sometimes angry. Now I know I'm functioning like this, I cannot do this. It's not that I blame this person. No? It's a point here I don't like. When someone is pointing to a master of what I have to do and how I have to be, and pointing to you have been with Roger Castillo, how can you be so angry? And what about let go and being attached? That is my question.
I don't think it's about letting go as an act. Letting go happens. I don't mean let go like as an instruction to tell someone let go. If the understanding is total, that nobody truly does anything. If I was meant to be cheated, I would be cheated. Let's say, right? It happened because it was meant to happen. How I take action is entirely based on my personality and what I would like to do about the situation. But with the total acceptance that it happened because it was meant to happen, otherwise it would not have happened, as simple as that. I no longer see the other as wholly and solely responsible for the act. I understand that he has done something based on his design, his shrewdness, his cleverness, and so on. And I need to tackle it to ensure I'm not cheated. But the understanding sinking in is when letting go happens. It's extremely frustrating to try to let go. It could be a total exercise in frustration. But when you relax, let's say the incident happens and you go back home and you sit down and say, okay, let me just review the event of the day. And you just look at it very objectively, like, okay, this happened and this was my reaction. I found it hard to let go. But when you see it as a whole, as a movement as a whole, you just see how everything was meant to be. And that is the letting go. That is the letting go. So I would certainly not tell anyone to let go, but I would point to the fact that letting go happens when there is no blame, when there is no condemnation. For yourself also. No condemnation for the way you react, because you're designed that way. That is also letting go. Letting go is not just letting go of the situation you've been confronted with by what the person did, but letting go of what you feel your reaction was and whether it was right or wrong. Even that is let go of. When it is seen as a movement in consciousness which happened. Nothing can give a bigger relief than that. Because you have no longer judged your own reaction. Precisely the way God made you. Even if there is a feeling here is it was meant to be. But we take ownership of that feeling. My feeling. I should not be feeling that. I should let go of that. Whereas just the seeing of it, the witnessing of it is the letting go. This feeling arose in a body-mind organism which happens to be mine. That is the letting go. Would you like to add something?
No. Well, yes, but not anything different from what you said. Just to reiterate, because it's a subtle point, because in language we will talk as if it's an instruction, as if it's a prescription. But just to reiterate, it's a description of what will happen or what might happen as the changes happen. As soon as it's received as a prescription, oh, I have to let go, then it is the doer that feels it is in control of making things happen, and the other half of the psychological identity that says, I want peace of mind, I have to have peace of mind now, so I have to let go. And then that is actually an intensifying, which is probably why you got agitated in the first place when she said, let go, because something inside might know, I can't let go. It's not my job to let go, and not your job to judge me for not having let go. And so I just wanted to reiterate the key to the answer, I feel, is that you can't do letting go. Letting go can happen. And if it happens, it's a result of the understanding having deepened. If it doesn't happen on some level, it means there's still some misunderstanding. But if there is a hands-off to even that misunderstanding, that is, as Gautam said, the letting go. Not a prescription, but a description.
Completely. A release and a relief.
Yeah.
I don't know the translation from relief. Relief and
Relief. Do you know the word relief in German?
Loslassen.
okay.
So I wanted to say also something about the letting go, and it is, we are just using words. So for me it is letting go. I also was looking at it and I found the letting go was actually the absence of resisting life. So the two letting go when there is full acceptance, which is just different words, but we get stuck in this, we have to do something, that doing, but in fact we just accept fully. And
But even, so I completely agree, but then even when you say accept fully, accepting fully is not something you do, but in exactly the same principle you said, accepting fully is the absence of non-acceptance, which is not something you can do, but happening. The non-acceptance doesn't arise, and that is acceptance. So, yeah.
total acceptance.
But if you tell someone, just accept.
It's the same then, let's just let go.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think this is one of the, Ramesh, in a way, had an issue with that point exactly, because he would see teachings that say, just accept what is. That doesn't make those teachings wrong at all, because you have to say it you have to describe what happens, which is acceptance, and therefore you can say it is about letting go or it is about accepting. And then on the other hand, you say, well, if we just leave it at that and tell someone to accept, when they're designed not to accept, we have to see that is futile. The person is designed not to accept, and to just tell them accept is, in a way, completely misunderstanding their very makeup, which is to not accept. So that's why the teaching says, okay, let's describe life as it is, and describe how it is that we have come to see life that forces the non-acceptance to be there. So if we describe the dynamics, and then someone's intellect and someone's awareness starts seeing the dynamic that is described and seeing the error, then the non-acceptance starts to dissolve on its own. And then what you find happening, not your doing, but just the new happening, the new result of the new up-to-date, is acceptance, or is letting go. And that's why satsang is a blessing in a way. If someone finds themselves in satsang, Ramesh would say, we are the lucky ones, God's favorites. Included in God's will is the fact that you are in satsang. For someone else, God's will is for them to be listening to the music. Maybe having great insight as well. But
But satsang is truly so beautiful because, of course, it literally translates as a gathering of truth. And the value is tremendous because it is one place when we go for satsang where we leave all our masks behind and we go to listen to a teaching. Whereas the rest of the day we have put on our masks again, playing different roles with different people we are dealing with, negotiating our way with them, conniving, planning, scheming, projecting. But in satsang, we come as we are, as God has made us, and offer ourselves to the truth, to the teaching. And then we feel this is where we belong. This is where we can be ourselves. Because we are listening to a very ancient song which has been coming through centuries and centuries and centuries. An ancient message, ancient message coming through different messengers. The postman delivers a letter to your doorstep and you read it and you say, wow, this is a way of looking at life. That is the message which is coming down. The messenger is the postman. But look at the compassion of truth. It has drawn you to the sang. It has pulled you in. The sat, the truth has pulled you. That is the true beauty of satsang. That is what, when you look forward to, that is what you're looking forward to, being yourself in the company of others who have come with the same purpose, the same intent. A brotherhood which has come together to listen to this very ancient song. And something far beyond words takes place, far vaster, which doesn't need your thinking mind to do its job. That is just the tip of the iceberg. That is the gift of satsang.
Namaste, sir. Sir, I feel for myself that possessiveness in a relationship is my biological preference. So I want to still confirm it with you that am I right in feeling like this, or it is only attachment to outcome? Yeah.
Your preference to have a relationship instead of it not being there, your preference to having a relationship that maybe is monogamous instead of polyamorous may well be a preference, no problem. If it turns into a craving and an uncomfortableness with the way the other is, what the other chooses, then it's the uncomfortableness is because of the attachment, which is saying, I need this relationship in order to be complete. And that doesn't mean that without attachment It doesn't mean that if attachment falls away, we will be okay with our partner being polyamorous. We would accept them as being a person that has their preference, which is to be polyamorous. And then we say, well, it doesn't match my preference. It creates pain. And so I agree that the relationship should come to an end, because I don't want to insist that you are different from the way you are. I don't want to insist on myself being different from the way I am. And therefore, the relationship is not a sustainable, ongoing thing. And so in the interest of the kindness to everyone, even though it's not my preference, because I would like to be with you, but actually I don't want to be with the you that you happen to be. So then our preference can even see, oh, actually I have a preference for what I would like that person to be, but I don't actually have a preference for who that person is, which doesn't mean I hate them, no resentment for them being that way. And then maybe there can be an alignment with my preference and the circumstance, because we see my preference is for X and that person is Y, not X. Where the conflict is where I say my preference is for X, and then we don't see the person as Y, we see them as potentially X. Or we see them as Y, but I can change them into X. And if we really accept the person for who they are, and we say, okay, they are Y and my preference is X, then there can be an internal harmony with a separation. Because we're not mistaking them as our preference.
Yes, thank you, sir. And very quickly, I just want to ask from you regarding that yesterday's thing of consciousness being there in sleep or not. So my question is that can I settle for now like this, that I mean, can my this understanding give me settlement that in deep sleep there is no experience, there is no my experience, and there is also then no consciousness, and in deep sleep it is consciousness in the form of potentiality. And when you said that you have experienced consciousness in sleep, then that was not deep sleep.
Correct.
Okay, thank you, sir.
To the other, I say I'm very happy with that. I don't think that view will cause any problems at all. I think it's as far as models go, it's actually the best one I could think of.
Oh, thank you.
You could say that there is, in theory, consciousness in deep sleep, but it is not consciousness linked to and functioning through the body. Because, but actually, just sticking with consciousness in its potential form in deep sleep is very fine. Because the truth is, there is no experience that you're aware of. So, relative to Shant, consciousness is in its potential form.
Yes, thank you, sir. Yes.
Do you have anything to add?